natural resource managers and catchment management authorities are confronted with a dilemma. Compared to the scale of the environmental issues they face, their financial resources are scarce. In the past, public funding has been spread thinly across many small projects. The hope was that this would address the major environmental threats and make lasting improvements in our landscape. Sometimes this has worked. But across the North Central region, a number of important sites continue to decline. With this in mind, the North Central Catchment Management Authority has adopted a new approach, targeting a number of highly valued sites or assets in the catchment. Guided by the latest scientific and community knowledge, the Catchment Management Authority is endeavouring to achieve the maximum benefit for the region's catchment communities. These selected locations include river reaches, wetlands and grasslands that can be effectively protected and enhanced. In this DVD, we're going to explore a number of these assets in the dryland region of the North Central catchment. We'll find out from the people who live there why these places are special and need to be protected for future generations. The York Plains area is a series of red gum and bull oak wetlands adjoining the Avon-Richardson River. It's 30 kilometres to the west of St Arnaud, located in an area of cleared farmland used for grazing and cropping. And although mostly dry for the past 10 years, it's the centre of the local floodplain in times of heavy rain. The largest wetland has a geographically unique sand lunette next to the river. It's got endangered adjoining woodlands and it's home to significant vegetation and important Indigenous cultural heritage. All of this is on private land. The threats that face these wetlands are a rising saline groundwater table due to past land clearing practices and the destruction of native habitat through overgrazing, cropping and clearing. The locals know how special these wetlands are and don't want to see them disappear.
It's something that's worth keeping, I believe, and something that's worth looking after.
I just think it'd be nice if it was preserved because there's not many areas like this left.
There's a lot of history on that part of the river from the early settlements.
Originally they were going to build a township there called Carruckabil, which they believed there might have been permanent water, so that was something they were going to do years ago, but that fell through.
The word Carruckabil is an Aboriginal term which means where the gums bloomed. It was used to describe the bend in the Avon River. The culture and history of Indigenous habitation in the area is important to the locals.
Yeah, well, York Plains was settled, I think, in the 1840s. Charles Creswick and his brother first settled the area. He didn't live long, Charles, but yeah, there's the history there, the sheep run that they had, how they came into the area, and the Aboriginals on the creek line. There's a lot of that history that, well, you know, it should be preserved. It shouldn't just be forgotten about.
The Aboriginals obviously lived there, so I guess there's a cultural value to them. They used to, there are Aboriginal ovens down there along the sandbar where they used to gather their food and cook.
It's just a beautiful, nice area to be in. No, it's just lovely, peaceful country down there.
Well, to me it's unique. It's got red gums and bull oak type interspersion in there, native grasses and things. Joe Wright's property next to me, it really hasn't had a plough in it very often in its lifetime.
There's some area down around the river, there's about 200 acres of bull oaks that have never been disturbed, no cultivation done down there. There's quite a few rare plants, interesting bird life. Oh, there's copper burweed down there, which is quite scarce apparently. Just native grasses. They're bull oaks. There's there's a couple of different types of mistletoe on the bull oaks, which is also fairly scarce. I think the area's just fairly scarce because there's not too many areas left in the state like that.
The area contains 3 threatened flora species: the turnip copperbur, bull oak and bull oak mistletoe. There's also 2 threatened fauna species: the brown tree creeper and the hooded robin.
I'm excited about it because it's confirming what I've always suspected, that some of the best assets in the state exist on private land, and we really should invest in those to get long-term change.
It's always easier to maintain something and look after it than watch salting rise and kill the river off and find. If you're just going to try and replant it the way it was, it never works. So it's important that we maintain it and look after it. The people in the area are keen to maintain and look after it if they're given some sort of assistance.
With the help of the federal and state governments, the North Central CMA has completed scientific investigations into the protection of these wetlands. To understand the threat of salinity, the land has been electronically surveyed to produce a soil conductivity map. This details the level of salt in the soil from the surface to 6 metres below. This can be used to quickly determine soil types and their agricultural boundaries. On the ground, landowners are being encouraged to plant deep-rooted perennial, native vegetation and lucerne to help lower the saline water table.
Well, I think lucerne's a major bonus. We're fencing off remnant vegetation to protect that, so hopefully that'll re-establish itself, and we're also putting in some corridors. So all those sort of things, if everyone does a little bit, will all help.
Yeah, I'm not a gum tree lover, so bull oaks are predominantly in this area, the old grey bull oak we call it. My father spent all his lifetime grubbing them out, and now I'm replanting them. They're a tough animal, they hang on in the droughts. They're a majestic type of tree, so I'm planting them as shelter belts, trying to encourage the animals back, or the bird life back. I'm not, as I say, 3 miles from here to the river, so I'm trying to make a corridor possibly so the birds will track up and down.
Weeds and vermin are a problem. The native species that we've perhaps lost, and the amount of brolgas that are around, yeah, it definitely has had an impact. We have a brolga habitat set up in what we call tuckers, and unfortunately the last 8 years there's been nothing breed there. We've had young brolgas get to the sort of the height of the ute and being killed by foxes. So unfortunately the brolga habitat hasn't worked particularly well.
The locals are very keen to care for this asset, but a serious threat in drought times is their need to get maximum production from their land, including the woodlands.
We want to preserve it. We've actually seen it going backwards in the last 10 years with all the dry years, but because of the financial difficulties, we've really got to run this farm to its maximum, and so that meant grazing that country fairly heavily in the past, and we understand that if we want to save it, that we probably have to stop doing that.
York Plains is certainly a site that the local community values and wants to preserve. And it's also a place where they intend to stay for quite a long time.
Creswick was buried there, and that was basically the start of the cemetery, or where the site is now. So that's, the trustees still operate a fairly tidy show, and yeah, there's people still want to be buried there, so they still want to come home. And naturally, I'd like to do the same, but it's just a peaceful site.
Reach 7 of the Avoca River stretches 32 kilometres from the township of Avoca north through Natty Yallock to Archdale Junction. This upper reach of the river receives its flow from the headwaters in Amphitheatre and the nearby Pyrenees Ranges. Primary production is the major activity in the area, with a mix of cropping, grazing and viticulture. The area is steeped in history, with Aboriginal habitation going back at least 13,000 years. Avoca was the home of one of the first major goldfield discoveries in northwestern Victoria in 1853. And the area had a population of 14,000 in the rush of 1854. Since settlement, mining and farming have left their mark on this reach of the river. Today, the river is judged to be in quite good condition, in spite of low rainfall over recent years. The main threats to this river reach are the decline of water quality because of salt brought into it by sedimentation of the tributary creeks and vegetation removal along the riverbanks. For so many reasons, the river has always been important to the local people, who have very strong feelings about this waterway.
Oh, people around here are absolutely passionate about the river. The river's the lifeblood. They've always had water for stock and domestic use, and yeah, water for fishing and water for swimming, and yeah. But it is downgrading.
My granddad and my dad used to live on the river, and now my granddad still does, and he's told me how it's changed in the last 10 years.
Now, we used to have a big swimming hole, and that was part of our young life when I was young. Every hot night or whatever, into the river, and weekends used to have swimming carnivals and gymkhanas, and yeah, the river was a big part of our young lives. But
yeah, look, as a kid, the fishing hole at the reserve, I was only a kid, and I do remember them quite well, the fishing carnivals in particular.
Oh yeah, when I was a young bloke, we could catch nearly every night between sundown and dark, blackfish and probably 2 or 3 redfin, and once in 50 times a cod.
The old man used to talk about blackfish. Well, I'm not real sure that they'd survive anymore. I think there's too much salt.
These days, the fishing's certainly not good. Increased salinity has meant a steady decline in the number of many fish species. It's also affected agricultural use of the water.
I had a pump on the river about a kilometre upstream from here, and the water used to, this is a fall of the country, the water used to run down and irrigate the paddocks down further, but the quality of the water deteriorated and we had to stop doing that.
There's also been heavy sedimentation of the Avoca caused by soil erosion in the higher country.
The number 2 comes out of the hills and used to flow down virtually above the surface. And then my forebears converted it to with a single furrow plough and a horse. And now on one of the corners, the single furrow is now 50 metres wide and 6 metres deep. All the dirt is gone, I suppose, ended up in the Avoca River eventually.
But local observations about the river and the changes that have been happening aren't just anecdotal. Since the early 1990s, students at the primary school at Natty Yallock have been carefully monitoring this section of the Avoca, keeping an impressive data record at the school.
The children at the Natty Yallock School have shown us what they can achieve by going down to the river, taking samples, being alert on the changes.
The Natty Yallock Primary School are embracing Water Watch. I've seen a DVD that they did and a claymation, and it's fantastic. They're so keen on river health, and from seeing that I was also encouraged to teach my children that as well.
Well, Natty's always been one of those schools that's been really motivated and interested in learning about its local environment, and we had a terrific program with Saltwatch, and then it developed into Water Watch, where monthly monitoring took place, and we had great associations with the Water Watch program, which built on getting the kids involved with other activities and taking some of those activities to bigger places and explaining. One of the great things we loved doing was talking to adults about what we were learning and what we were understanding, and I think that's one of the benefits of a program in a school like Water Watch, was that it gave us the chance to tell adults what we were learning and what we were understanding, and making them realise that there's a problem here and we'd like to work on solving it.
Retired school principal Hayden Pilgrim has been the driving force behind the school's interest in the river.
The world we live in was changing so quickly that it was an area that the kids needed to become involved with, because it's their world and we messed it up, and these kids have got to fix it. So that's where we came. That's the starting point that we came from. It goes back to early 90s. And it was just a study of what was happening in our river. The river is actually on the front doorstep of the school, basically, and it used to flood every year. We'd have floods and send kids home, and the need to just see what was happening to our river, because the flooding stopped in the early late 90s, and we needed just to see what was actually happening with the quality of the water. And we did an area of about 30 kilometres, I guess, the length of the river, where we just did a study of what was actually happening with the quality of the water. And it originated from salt. Salt was the big thing in the late 90s.
Good. I must have my Maths Genius up here. Thank you. 2,670. So we couldn't drink that, but pretty much any other animal could drink that, and they'd be pretty happy about it too. I've been facilitating the Water Watch program here at Natty Alec Primary School for the past 3 years. The students here have a real passion for the river, and not only do they undertake water quality monitoring, but they go above and beyond what is expected of them with the Water Watch program. As part of their monitoring, they've identified that there's 2 main issues at this site, those being salinity and turbidity. Now that we know what the issues are, we can start and lead to action.
With help from the local Landcare group, the Natty Alec students have shared their Water Watch investigations at a number of national conferences. The school findings have also encouraged changes to local farming practices and motivated community action to look after the river.
Oh, look, there's a lot can be done for the river. It can be turned around, and I hope it is. As farmers, we're sort of struggling with the dry times. We're struggling to employ, to do a lot of this work ourselves, but these projects are sort of community things anyway, and sometimes we forget that people like in Maryborough enjoy and surrounding areas enjoy a river and enjoy coming to fish and for recreation, and so therefore I think some of these projects we should have assistance to do them. I don't think it can be expected that the farmer do them on his own.
I think it would be great to be able to continue to celebrate the river as it is, but also to build on it and enhance it.
Four important river assets at the headwaters of the Loddon and Campaspe catchments are the Loddon River Reach 10, Sailors Creek, Coliban River Reach 22 and Kangaroo Creek. These waterways have high value because of their healthy ecological state, In fact, some sections have been described as near pristine. They support intact and important streamside vegetation. They're home to threatened flora and fauna species, deliver good quality water to downstream users, and provide important habitat for aquatic animals. The major threats to these waterways are invasive plants, declining water quality due to the development of land next to the streams, and degraded streamside vegetation. Common to all four of these assets is an intense gold mining history which had a huge impact on the waterways in the past. It was particularly intense on the Loddon and Sailors Creek.
There is history down there. There are a lot of mine shafts just below this area, shallow mine shafts, and left by the Chinese when they were here, 2,000 Chinese on the creek.
The Chinese were the largest group of foreign nationals on the diggings, and by 1858 they comprised 20% of the colony's mining population. But in spite of the huge impact of the gold rush times, the rivers have been resilient. Today there are only scattered signs of this history visible to the eye. Uneven mullocky ground, tailings, and the evidence of old mine shafts. But more recently, over the past 20 years, there's been a significant change in land usage, with a migration of people from the city and the subdivision of farming properties into smaller holdings.
It's close to Melbourne. The water quality is good. The country is good. It's some of the best country in the state. It's undulating. It's, God's little acre, as I'd describe it, yeah.
Just in this immediate area, there were 2 families living here. We now have a community fireguard group, just this Mains Road area, and there are 26 members of that fireguard group. Down at the corner there was one mailbox and served 4 people. But then I've forgotten what the count is now. It's about 20 mailboxes down there at the corner of Denver.
Between our place and Wood End there used to be 2 houses, and now in that Ashbourne Road and the offsets to it, there'd be, I'd say, getting close to 600 or 800.
But happily, these newcomers are often keen to be good custodians of the land and look after the waterways.
The people that move here from the city, I guess a lot of people look on it as hobby farming, but in our experience, quite a lot of the friends we've made here, and we've made them through land care and through beef check course and the like, have taken that hobby farming pretty seriously. And I think some of the properties are probably run as efficiently as a bigger farm might ever be run.
Well, when we bought this property in 2000, this area just where we are now was covered with gorse and blackberry, and so what we set about doing was to remove the gorse and blackberry over a period of time, and then Jill's undertaken a tremendous replanting program.
It was one of the most wonderful things about this property, to discover the river after we knew the river was there, but there was so much gorse and blackberry. You couldn't see it from the house, and it was difficult to walk along the banks. So it was exciting and wonderful. The rock formations and the natural environment, once the weeds had been removed, was astonishing. We love it.
Some of the properties here have undergone significant development. Paul Bangay is a well-known landscape garden designer who has built a European-style property close to one of the targeted assets. Paul also runs a small herd of cattle.
I didn't want the cattle coming into this area. I really want to maintain it as not a pristine. It can't be pristine because all the weeds are here, but try and keep it as indigenous as possible to the area. So by keeping the cattle out, hopefully, you know, the native grasses will come back properly. We've got the native orchids in here. Some of the ferns might come back. So, you know, the hope is that we can keep it as a natural forest down here.
Weeds, primarily gorse, blackberry and willow, are a significant problem for all of these river reaches.
Larger weeds, larger numbers of them in the one place. Blackberries crowding stream stream sides for many hundreds of metres, whereas in the past they might have existed in pockets. So an increase in weeds, it's a big job, it's such a big job.
Recent action by the CMA has involved the use of contractors to mechanically remove the gorse and blackberries. There's also a problem with willows that were once planted to help stabilise the stream banks. Typical was the willow invasion at the Malmesbury Common on the banks of the Coliban.
Well, in 2006, this area of water behind us, you would hardly have seen it. It was completely filled. The old willows had cracked, as their cracked willow, fallen into the river, reshot. For about another 3 kilometres downstream was known as the Malmesbury Choke, where the entire riverbed was in fact blocked and closed with willows. There wasn't a single spot for at least 2.5 km from here where you could actually put a fishing line in and see the water. The entire river was completely choked with willow. Since the willows have gone, what we've seen, the truth of, if you get the shady willows out, that the sedges come back. Botanists have been through here jumping up and down, calling it, one bloke called it a botanical ark, in terms of the remnant sedges and reeds and rushes and other plants that have remained in this area, which were being overcome by the willows. Within 12 months, what we just see behind us here is all regrowth.
Some suggest that all non-Indigenous vegetation should be removed from our waterways without exception.
Aspirations, what I'd like to see in the future, basically a restoration of what it once used to be. We're in an environment here, you know, which is not part of Europe, and so I don't see any sense that a European tree should live along this river.
But others argue that some of these introduced trees form a very attractive and important part of the landscape.
I think it's a matter of just having policies that recognise the heritage value of certain places. The heritage values are part of not only an important spiritual, if you like, and cultural heritage in central Victoria, in this case, but they're also part of our economy, they're part of our tourist industry. People come to a place like Dalesford because it has non-Indigenous trees, because it has autumn trees, because it has Europeanised landscapes.
And to add yet another view, the permaculture approach sees those willow mats in the stream beds as a way of repairing the ecosystem.
I certainly see that direction of change in our streams in these new emergent forests is one where they are rebuilding the floor of the stream back up the material that was lost after European settlement, with the huge carving out of our stream courses. So they're building up that core of absorbent soil, alluvial soils along the stream courses, which of course holds the water and provides a constant seepage zone.
But while the removal of exotic trees can be a contentious issue, there is one thing that all the catchment communities agree on. There's a lot less water visible in these waterways.
You know, there was so much water here. But I would say the last 10 years we had less and less rain in winter, and right now we don't have any water in the creek. It used to be beautiful coming here on a summer evening down to the creek. I used to come here quite often with my daughter, and we'd sit on the bank and watch the platypus and the water rats playing in the water.
10 years where I am, and I actually just did this the other day, we're looking at an average rainfall of 1,100 to 1,200 millimetres of rainfall. The average over the last 7 years has been 860 millimetres of rainfall. So that represents a 20 to 30% reduction in rainfall over the last 7 years, which
some people say it's drought, but I just think it's the beginnings of climate change, and we've sort of have a shift in weather patterns, and this is probably the way of the future.
Whatever the future does hold for our climate and these waterways, it's clear that with assistance, the communities living here are keen to continue to work to preserve and enhance these special places.
I mean, I think the thing that we've always felt is that we're here for a relatively short period of time, and you don't own the river. You never really, I mean, okay, it's also Crown land, and so you don't own it from that point of view, but nevertheless, I mean, we're a caretaker for a relatively short period of time, and the whole aim is to leave it better than we found it, basically. And if we can do that, then perhaps we might even reflect the approach the Aboriginal people took to managing land, rather than this sort of pressure for, or not pressure, but concept of ownership.
There's quite a spiritual element to working with the land, closely with the land. And when you're down on your hands and knees and you're surrounded by birds and little creatures, and you smell the smell of the soil, and you look around you and you start seeing little plants regenerating, and the excitement of finding some of the wildflowers growing again is quite magic.